please. Good morning or afternoon or evening or middle of the night, depending on where it is that you are Zooming in from. Welcome to this morning's author talk with the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. My name is Susan Barber, and I coordinate the community education programming that we do for the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. And I'm so grateful to be speaking this morning to author Lois Kelly, who I know from another place that we hang out. We are all we're part of Anne Randolph, who also has spoken here and done a writing workshop with us. We are Anne's students, and we met in Anne's writing workshop, and I listened to some of Lois's story and was so compelled to ask her to speak here. So I would love, thank you so much. Allison has put up where she is Zooming in from. If people are feel like doing that, please do. It's always interesting to see where people are joining us from. Just a message that this is going to be recorded. We're going to mute everybody except for probably Lois and me. And we're going to have opportunity for Q&A during the conversation with Lois. And if people have questions, if they're kind of shy and they don't want to speak on the Zoom, feel free to put your question in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that and would be happy to go back to that and answer that. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation Community Education Program. We try to offer a couple events each month that continues the work of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who was a psychiatrist, a humanitarian, and a hospice pioneer. Elisabeth is often known as the death and dying doctor, but Elisabeth, for those who were fortunate enough to meet her, she is the life and living person. Elisabeth firmly believed that people are alive and living until their very last breath, and encouraged people to have conversations about death, dying, loss, and grief long before illness or grief appears, so that people, by unburdening oneself with the fear of death, that the idea of being able to fully live our own lives is really something that was so important, so very important to Elisabeth. So thank you all for joining us. The foundation is supported completely through donations. So for those of you that were able to donate to be here, we so appreciate it. The foundation also works internationally. Ken just got back from Guatemala. Ken Ross, her son, manages this program. So there are chapters around the world, in Japan and Singapore, South America, Central America, educating people, palliative care doctors and nurses, as well as communities, and providing everything from respite homes for children to meals for villages in Guatemala, where the foundation serves. So thank you all. Terry, hi, Terry. It's always wonderful to be on these because see some familiar names and faces. Terry, I would turn up your volume. Is anybody else having a problem with audio? No, thank you. So maybe just go out of the room and come back in if that doesn't fix it. Okay, thank you so much. So it looks like it's a very local problem. So also I want to just introduce Lois this morning. Lois is a wonderful writer. She is a champion of people who think differently, work bravely, laugh generously, and live optimistically. She started her career writing human interest stories for Boston area newspapers, then became a corporate organizational and communication strategist for Fortune 500 companies, and co-founded Rebels at Work. She's earned degrees and certification in communication business psychology, and she was married for 40 years until her husband died of Parkinson's disease. She's a mother of 2 adult sons and lives currently in Providence, Rhode Island. And that is a very, very brief introduction to Lois. So Lois, I'm going to bring you down here.
Great. It's so nice.
Turn this over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
It's really my pleasure. And I thought what I would do today, and if anyone wants to do something differently, just raise your hand or put it in chat, is to briefly tell you about just some context about my marriage and my experience with Parkinson's with my husband read a little bit from the book, and then share some of the things that helped me in the journey that none of us ever wanted to sign up for. So I hope that works. And let me just give you a little background. I'm going to share my little screen here. And let me get here. Okay. I wanted to give you some background to start about my husband and about me, because I think that helps. And sometimes when we've been caregivers for a very long time and we've lost someone gradually, which is why I named the book Slow Loss, it's hard to remember who that person was. And also we change too. So this is a picture of my husband with his two sons and granddaughter. He was a positive person. He was so kind. He was so thoughtful. And he was so trustworthy. I mean, he was one of those people that people trusted him. His name was Greg, more than anybody in the world. The picture on the right is me, and I just, I've always been a very optimistic person, thinking I can handle everything. And that's part of my story. So in 2009, I wrote a book called Be the Noodle, 50 Ways to be a Compassionate, Courageous, Crazy Good Caregiver. And the book was a little book that people seem to like about helping my mother die. She was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. She said, I would like to live in my little house on Cape Cod. And I had my own business. So I was the sibling that went to Cape Cod and helped my mother die, which took about 2.5 months. And people have said, wow, now with your husband, it must be much easier because you helped your mother die. And this is me just laughing my head off, because helping someone die well within 2.5 months is like sprinting. It's difficult and challenging, but it doesn't last that long. I think when you have someone with a slow loss disease, whether it's Alzheimer's, dementia, Lewy body, Parkinson's, it's a very different experience to care for someone over a very, very long period of time, where they're not only physically declining. In some ways, the physical issues were the least of it, but to lose someone cognitively and to lose the person that they had been is very hard. So the question is, you must know so much from helping your mother. I knew nothing. And then I started to, I joined a support group here. I'm based in Providence, Rhode Island, with 7 amazing women whose husbands were in about the same stage. I also went online, and it was shocking how many people, and these are just some of the groups, who go on, these are Facebook groups, who are kind of screaming for help and are confused and are not getting the support and advice from traditional healthcare networks. And it was the reason why I was compelled to share my story. The other reason was I found with Parkinson's, I was lucky that our neurologist has written books about Parkinson's and is viewed as one of the experts in the world. But he would always say, you can live a normal life with Parkinson's. One day he said to me, it was a very bad visit. A lot of difficult things were going on. And in my desperation, I said, how long might this last? I mean, I was at my wit's end. And he said, your husband, other than the Parkinson's, is in very good shape. He could live into his 90s. And I want to tell you, I wept on the way home. So in my experience, and again, I am not an expert. I'm just sharing how I did it and what I went through, and some of my friends. But in slow loss caregiving stages, maybe these are the stages. The first one is acceptance. You think, I've got this. I can do this. And in the beginning, for us, after the first diagnosis, it wasn't so bad. And I thought, there's nothing I cannot do. The next stage for me was anxiety, that things were getting, and I'll go into this, a little kooky. Like there was no predictability. And I sort of defaulted to, oh my God, what's going to happen today? And I think the other thing, if I were to be honest with everyone, I was a corporate executive and I was maybe a little bit of a control freak and a kind of type A. And now I'm living with my husband with this degenerative neurological disease. So I had a lot to learn too. The third stage might be despair and anger. Like I'm losing it too. And the last for me was exhaustion and relief, that we made it to the end. And I think for me, there was participatory grief, losing my husband all the way along. And the first year after he died, I didn't really feel anything except exhaustion. There's, I love this graphic. It's from a woman in another support group who, she just came out with a book called Comics for Caregivers. And she too thought at the beginning of the disease, I am super caregiver. I can do anything. So the other things for me and my husband with the disease, the acceptance in the beginning, probably from 2012, when he was diagnosed, to 2017, there were mobility issues. He was very tired. He would get a little bit anxious and kind of in denial of what was going on. Then my anxiety, again, this is from the caregiver, my husband with his Parkinson's, and again, this doesn't happen to everyone, but it is quite common. There was a lot of compulsive spending. There was some identity theft because my husband liked talking on the phone to strangers, and liked opening up credit cards. So there was a lot of compulsive spending, showtime, which I'll address in a minute. And then he started to choke a bit, and the food became an issue. The despair and anger came as with the disease and taking so many medications, he developed hallucinations, became very paranoid. The accusations that he was fine, that I was the problem, a porn addiction, and falls. And the last stage was when all of the above, when he was moved to a care facility and finally died. And just a little bit about his progression from 2006 to 2012. There were weird things happening, but we didn't know what they were, so we just went from doctor to doctor to doctor. And he was diagnosed in 2012. My husband was a very well-known runner. He ran marathons, he ran 10Ks, he ran out mountains, and he really tried to hold on to his physicality. So this is him in 1984 in a race, a 10K race. He did it in 17 minutes. And he was trying to do like a 5K in 2014. This was a Parkinson's event. It took him 90 minutes. In 2015, he tried it again. He couldn't complete it. He tried it in 2016, couldn't complete it. 2017, he was a spectator. In 2018, he stayed home because it was all too depressing. But I tell you this because one of the things I appreciate is his perseverance. I think it's hard. I know a lot of friends, their husbands really are quite dependent, and I think it puts an extra burden on everything. But for me, it helped that he had that grit. There are a lot of other things that happened on the way. This is us and our wedding anniversary at the lymphedema clinic, which was an issue. And then in 2020, things got really bad. I love this photo because my husband insisted, it was a spring day here in Rhode Island, on going for a walk. And we went. And right after this photo was taken, he fell over. We were in the middle of the woods. He weighed 200 pounds. I weigh 108. And I thought, I don't know what's going to happen. Finally, I did call and someone hiked out into the woods and helped us out. But it was really the beginning of the end for us. And then 2020 to 2023 was really marked by a lot of hallucinations and paranoia. The biggest issue for me, probably in this whole disease, is that my husband would tell everyone, doctors, family members, I'm not that bad. She makes me out to be worse. And I guess it's gaslighting. I'm not the problem, you are. And I think it was the most challenging part for me. And then we would go to doctors, and I would call this showtime, that my husband would actually somehow summon up his old self and be great. And the doctors would say, you're doing great. And it was just a really tough cycle. And I guess this is what it felt like. I kept thinking, I shouldn't complain. Others are worse than me. I don't want to be whiny. Maybe it's in my head. Maybe this isn't so bad. But I felt like I did a type of self-torture. And what helped me was, what helped me was actually writing. So I wrote every day, and much of that writing became part of the book. So I wrote out a lot of my confusion. I wrote out so many moments of joy. And what I'd love to do is just share a couple of those stories from the book with you. So let me just get to that. So I think that what I might start with is I found it very difficult to express my anger. I found it very frustrating with many of the associations saying you can have a good life. I found it very tough with the associations, even with this book, that they want no part of it. So let me read this. It's called Enraged by Perky Advice. Despite my willpower to ignore it, perky advice enrages me. I'm in a funk about all that is happening in the world. mass shootings, school book bans, losing 2 feet of shoreline in Rhode Island beaches every year due to climate change, opioid crises. One of my go-to coping skills to snap out of a funk like this is to learn something new. Today's been a challenging, oops, I'm so sorry. Today's been a challenging day of doctor's appointments. I go online and read, Finding a More Meaningful Life Through Caregiving. If he is living in 1968, enter into his reality and enjoy it. This isn't to pacify him. This is an opportunity to communicate and treasure memories out of time. Are you kidding me? How many times would you like to hear the same 2 or 3 treasured memories? 20, 100, every day for 10 years? Forget out of time. I am out of my mind hearing about his time at Hunter Air Force Base and how big the NCR computers were back in the day. Hearing the same memories over and over again is like noise torture, like I'm a prisoner of war, being tortured with the repeated playing of heavy metal Metallica and Barney theme song music, which was used on Iraqi POWs, according to a BBC report. I really should stop reading this. Look at the cheesy photographs of smiling people. It's hard to believe the guys in the pictures are losing their minds and that their brain cells are disintegrating. Look at them wearing those crisp, ironed blue Oxford shirts with full heads of styled hair, smiling attentively and looking alert. Have you been in a neurologist waiting room lately? People are leaning on their walkers, wearing shirts that snap because buttons are unmanageable. Their faces are blank, vague, emotionless expressions. This disease is tragic. Do not try to be cheery and delusional. We caregivers are not buying it. And the wives in the booklet photos? Look at them fawning all over their husbands, so patient, all soft edges. Their faces have wrinkles, but they look rested, like they sleep 8 hours a night, like they have no backaches from getting someone twice their size up off the floor after a fall. I used to want to look like Audrey Hepburn did at my age. Now, I want to look like one of these caregiver models. Their hair is such a perfect color, and the bob is blow-dried perfectly. Gorgeous. I turn the car radio to the local NPR station, and the This I Believe segment is playing. My mood turns from balanced to bitch crazy angry. Many of us have known friends and loved ones whose minds and mental faculties have slipped away as some form of dementia has tightened its unrelenting grip, says the local NPR announcer. We know the challenging signs, confusion about time and place, memory lapses, language difficulties, mood changes. No doubt this is painful and an agonizing process for nearly everyone caught in its midst. But some of us also find precious, even bright moments as we travel this complicated journey. Jennifer has found just that. And in today's segment, she shares the lessons she's learned. Jennifer tells us about the unexpected pleasures of spending time with her 85-year-old grandfather who had Alzheimer's. Perky Jennifer tells us how her family gathered round and helped her granddad, how sad it was when they had to move him into a nursing home, how she volunteered at a daycare center for dementia patients after he died, which turned into a whole new career path as a recreational director at a care facility. This has been such a beautiful, life-affirming career change for Jennifer. Her granddad would be so proud of her. Go Jennifer, you bitch. If I were on the radio, I would tell my extraordinary caregiver sisters to tune out upbeat, superficial, well-intentioned people in propaganda. It's more delusional than our husbands' deteriorating brains. We're getting through each day. We're grieving. We're running a marathon we never trained for. We need stamina and kind truth tellers, not perky cheerleaders. We need to be able to deal with reality and not become angry, anxious, bitter victims. So, anger, which I guess my friends didn't like it, but I felt I had to write it out because some days are just that hard. I'll write something on the flip side, and it's called Please, Please, Please. Dear eternal guidance, or Jesus, Mary, or Joseph, please help me stay optimistic. Please don't let me become bitter and brittle. I struggle every week to be caring, kind, patient, compassionate, and a good listener, like all the Parkinson's and Alzheimer's associations recommend. I struggle not to morph into a victim. But man, oh man, some days are really hard. His hallucinations are usually nice monkeys or children, but those snakes last week were violent. He threw his iPad across the room to get them. He installed security cameras outside and inside the house. He keeps accusing me of being the cause of all his issues and discomfort. Then there's the obsessive spending on sump pumps, hoses, and replacement parts for the sump pumps. We've never needed to turn the sump pump on. We now have 3 sump pumps installed. Jesus, please never flood our yard. Then there are the denials. I'm fine, he says when I try to pick him and the rollator up off the floor at 2:30 a.m. This is not fine. And dear God, I hate that edge in my voice when we have visitors. Wow, they say, he is doing great. I thought he'd be in worse shape after all these years with the disease. He is not doing great, I correct them. You have no idea. My response makes them feel uncomfortable. Maybe they think he's right when he tells them that I'm going crazy, not him. Thank you, God, for sending me good friends who are going through the same things with their husbands. They've taught me so much, and they never judge my despairing outbursts and stories about what's going on with Greg and me. I'm so sorry these friends' spouses have been sick for so long, God. They've told me about their angry, bitter years and how they're behind them now. These caregiver sisters are amazing people. Please, God, make me more like them. Help me get beyond this bitterness. The sooner, the better. Dear Lois, this is God. I've reviewed your many letters and want you to know that I have love rays beaming into your house. I overheard you telling your sisters that you feel like you're settling into a new place, making it a home versus a temporary place to live until he dies. This acceptance you're feeling is from one of the love beams. Remember last week when you thought the moon was lighting up the pond outside your bedroom windows? Those were my love beams. In addition to the love beams, I'd like to suggest a few things. I want you to let him go down to the cellar and play with his new sump pumps. Stop nagging him with, be careful, every time he goes downstairs. If he falls down the stairs, you call 911. If he buys too many hoses and sump pumps, you eventually call JD Junk Dog and they'll take them away in their trash trailer. No big deal. I also want you to practice using a new word. Every time you mutter fuck, loudly or in your head, replace it with okie dokie. Because honey, it will be okie dokie. You've got so many good friends. You've got enough money to hire a little help. Whoa, whoa. Do I hear you pushing back on that statement? I know you worry incessantly about money, but there will be enough. Not gobs for National Geographic trips or a house in Woods Hole, but enough to hire help so you can get away for a couple of days. Know that winter will be hard again. Your friends will be heading to Florida or Portugal. You'll be putting ice melt on the driveway. I'm absolving you of all Puritan guilt about being lazy in the dead of winter. Read, binge on those series. When you're rested, you're much less likely to be bitter. You can do this, my love. There is nothing good about this situation with your husband. Know that I am not testing your goodness, nor making you do penance. It is just the end of life on earth, the wearing away of minds and bodies. This is not to be feared. Others will have their challenges too, so don't think you've been called out in some special way. You're just walking through this earlier than your friends. You do know, I hope, that your friends have always looked up to you, especially your bravery. Show them how to bravely care for a partner. Let them in on the struggle for love over bitterness. You don't have to hide the ugly and put a smiley face on things. We don't give sainthood to martyrs. Things will get worse. You know that. I am here for you, as are your sisters, cousins, friends, neighbors, and the 911 EMS professionals. Now go take a shower, put on your favorite fleece sweater, turn off the computer, and relax. Okie dokie? Dear God, okie dokie? For some reason, I thought you'd sound more dignified, like a British Shakespearean actor. But Roger on the relaxing and not becoming, oh, woe is me, all the time. So the book, I try to balance it with those days we feel despairing, the days we're crushed, and the small moments of joy that I experience. In my days, some days when I didn't know what else to do, but I would write to G. You know, I don't know if that's God or divine guidance, and I would get back wonderful advice. So I can read a little bit more or kind of flip to some slides on kind of the big takeaways I had. Does anyone, you want to put in chat? Is there any consensus on what you all would like?
I'm curious, Lois, what Sally Shannon put up a question a little bit earlier. I'm wondering if we could address this, and that might, maybe some more people would have questions. But she says that she is a dementia caregiver. She's still waiting for the acceptance stage. She went directly to anxiety, despair, and anger. Do you have any advice about any of that?
I think just it is what it is, and you've got to be kind for yourself. And it's a roller coaster of emotions. I'm not sure these stages progress in a linear way. I think some days we jump all over the place. And with any sort of neurological decline, you know, it's like what's happening in our face that day. And I think the hardest thing is thinking, oh, I should be able to do this, or I shouldn't be angry, or I shouldn't be anxious. And that doesn't help. It's just like, I am anxious. I read a lot of Pema Chodron during the process. And one of the things that I loved is her advice is like, nothing's going to last. It's going to change. And I think with dementia and paranoia and the psychotic dementia, as many of you know, what is today, it's different. It's unpredictable. So I just think that self-compassion, and there are no hard and fast stages.
Thank you. Lois, there was also in response, I think, to your reading and some of the comments about, oh, he's doing great. That Sally also said, I find it very difficult to deal with those whose denial, oops, I'm sorry, I just lost the question there, whose denial of the disease reflects their own fear of mortality. They often can't deal with the truth of what's in front of them out of their own fear. I'm curious, like, if that's an experience that you also moved through.
Absolutely. And I found a lot of people that I thought I could count on for help disappeared. So my husband's brother lived 1 mile from us, and he just disappeared. And I think losing his brother was so uncomfortable for him. He just disappeared. And I think a lot of people, it could be their own mortality. I just think people like everything tied neatly. People just run from discomfort. And the thing that I've learned, and I've grown from is, you just step into it, and it is what it is. There's not much discomfort that I can't I can handle people's discomfort. I can handle my own discomfort better now. Talk about hiring help. Hiring help was, there were a couple things. One is my husband at first really resisted it. And he got really angry, and he said, what is someone going to do? Like, sit here and watch me listen to books on tape? So how I began to introduce help is that it would be someone who I said, she'll be doing light housekeeping, and then be here if you need anything, and then I'll be able to do errands. And so the light housekeeping helped him begin to say yes. And then he forged a relationship with a wonderful woman whose father had died from Parkinson's. So that was our way in, until what happened to us as the psychotic dementia got worse. It started to scare the caregiver. So eventually, my husband had just routine cataract surgery, and the sedative and anesthesia from the cataract surgery sent him in a full-blown crisis, and he had to be hospitalized and tied down. And then I had to find a care facility. So my other advice is, you get to a point, no more optional surgery that involves anesthesia. Don't do it. Do not do it. It's I haven't heard it leading to good outcomes for very many people. What other questions do we have?
Somebody is asking for the takeaways, so I think we're going to get to those. And somebody else just was asking about, let me just expand this question, just living in the UK and then coming back to the United States, and it sounds like they got caregiver assistance living in the UK as part of the national health benefit. But here it's, I think this is something that we would hear very often when I was working in hospice, is that people, sort of there's an expectation or a misunderstanding that hospice would include caregiver support, which is erroneous. That's not part of the hospice insurance benefit. But that's a piece for many people, because caregivers are very expensive,
Right.
And very much needed. That's a place where a lot of times there's just a gap.
I think it's a crisis in the United States. I'm part of a caregivers group, and some people were very fortunate that they're very wealthy. And I really was despairing some days where I asked somebody, they had two caregivers. I said, how much are you spending a year? And they said, $175,000 to $200,000. And that was another day I almost wept, because I could never, that wasn't an option for me. I think I try to do whatever I can now that my husband has died, for other people who don't have a lot of money, to just give them a break, call them on the phone, whatever you can, because it's so lacking in the United States.
It's absolutely a crisis. Here in California, I live in the Bay Area. I'm currently in Los Angeles, but in the Bay Area, when we were working for hospice and we had families that were requesting caregivers and could actually afford them, the caregivers couldn't live within 2 hours of any of the Bay Area cities like San Francisco or Oakland because the housing is so expensive. So they were driving 2 or 3 hours just to get to a job. And then, that's one of the reasons that caregiving costs here are so expensive. And it is a crisis. My day job currently, we're working with people who are incarcerated, who are working in prisons to provide caregiving. These are people who are incarcerated, not the workers in the prison, but to care for each other. And they are remarkable caregivers. Any one of the 105 people we've trained in the last 2 years, I would love to have caring for me when I was dying. But those are folks that will, if they ever get out of prison, they will never be able to work anywhere because they have a felony record, despite the fact that they can be extraordinary caregivers. So, there are people that could provide excellent care, but there's like barriers all over for people being able to work in this field. And then the expense for most families is prohibitive. And it is a crisis. I appreciate Marta earlier said her husband died of Parkinson's, and she's on the board of the Family Caregiver Alliance, which is a national organization that we might talk a little bit about later. So we have a number of questions, but I'm thinking that before we address them, maybe you could talk about your takeaways. I don't know if that will address any questions.
Yeah, I'll go through them quickly and then,
perfect.
get to questions. One of the things that really helped me, when my husband was first diagnosed with Parkinson's, we went to a really wonderful retreat out at the Kripalu, it's a yoga center out in Western Massachusetts. And it was both Eastern and Western medicine, kind of 5-day workshop. And one of the psychologists introduced everyone to the 24 universal character strengths that we all have. And we all assessed ourselves on what our character strengths are. And then she went on to explain to us like how to lean on your character, like your top character strengths in times when you feel severely challenged. And this helped me, and it helped my husband so very much. So my husband, his character strengths was love of learning, perseverance, and appreciation of beauty and excellence. So what was great, when he would get frustrated and before he really got into the end stages of the disease, he knew more about Parkinson's than anybody. He would read about it and learn about it, and that would help him become a little less anxious. And the perseverance is physically or just doing things. He had every kind of tool so he could be as independent as possible. For me, my character strengths, one is creativity. So I found that writing was really helpful. I do a lot of art, was really helpful. It was like a way to escape everything for me. Bravery has always been one of my character strengths. So even in the face of some really tough situations, I reminded myself that I really could do this because I was brave. I have included on this slide, for a lot of my professional work, I've used character strengths in corporate settings. Because when you learn what your top 3 or 5 strengths are, it's really helpful to be able to use them. So there's a link down here on my account. You can just go in and take this survey. It takes like 10 minutes. It's one of the most respected evidence-based research studies in the world. So I found this helpful, like what am I really made of and how do I use that? So that might be helpful to some people. The other thing for me is I'm kind of a real nature girl. And some days I just sat and I looked out the window, or I would I would listen for certain bird calls. I would look at where's the moon rising. And this was, I suppose it's mindfulness. But for me, this really helped me just settle down quickly. And it kind of fed my spirit of just noticing things that are beautiful, that are nature. And it was also reminded me that our human life is nature and it has a season. I also took a class, I live in Providence at Brown, called Unwinding Anxiety. And where it really helped to figure out what were my triggers that could really send me down a bad spiral. And there were a lot of great tools. It's in this book, Unwinding Anxiety. It's so practical. And there are all kinds of tools. And one of the tools I used is when I could spot myself begin to go down a bad spiral where I would get overly anxious or angry or any of those feelings that are not very constructive. And I picked out a word. I would just say to myself, avalanche. I felt like the avalanche was about to come. And when I said avalanche, I kind of snapped myself out of it. Like don't go there. Because, it is true that the only things we can control, especially as caregivers, is how we kind of react to things. Some days you can't control it, in my experience. But in other days, I use the word, avalanche when I was triggered. Music was huge to me. It was another way for me to just escape. I'm a real Nick Cave fangirl. And Nick Cave, when his 15-year-old son died in an accident, wrote an album called Ghost Teen, which just kind of spoke to my soul. And then he wrote a book with an Irish journalist about his experience with loss and grief. That was very, very inspiring to me and very comforting to me, because, he said we have a choice on, do we become brittle and angry, or do we allow ourselves to break open and grow into someone new? And he also writes, and he writes this newsletter called The Red-Handed Files, where people send him questions, and a lot of them are about loss and grief. And he writes back, and they're magnificent. So music, and Nick Cave in particular, have really helped me. And as I'm kind of on the other side of my grief, kind of reclaiming my life, he has a new CD called Wild Gods. And I'm happy to say when he opens his US tour on April 15th, I have tickets. The other thing is, this goes back to the question about emotions. Sometimes you just have to scream. Sometimes you just have to cry. And it's okay. I think it's a long haul. And I would just say, it's all right to be crazy or scream or cry sometimes. The other thing that I think has really helped is when you really know who your close friends are, right? So those friends who are kind of like they're your choir, the people you can depend on. And those friends, I just love them so much because I could just call them anytime and they would just listen to me. And sometimes I had to train them a little bit. I said, this is just, I just need you to listen call. This is not I need your help call. Because, sometimes when you're just upset and people who don't know what you're going through, they try to help and it's so unhelpful. So my friends were great. I had a wonderful Parkinson's support group. And if you can find one or dementia, I think it's really helpful. Our spouses were all in about the same place. One day I called one of my friends, I was having a hard day, and a woman in my Parkinson's support group, I said, okay, listen, there's a flight to Zurich tonight from Boston at 6 p.m. and there are tickets. Do you want to go with me? And she's like, oh, I don't know about Zurich. I think we should go to Oslo. And we went on this make-believe thing, knowing that our husbands were in the other room and that we had to start organizing the next round of pills. But with those great friends, just playing make-believe and fantasizing and being able to vent is wonderful. The other thing that helped me is finally just knowing when to stop. And the doctors kept saying, now we could try this. Or as my husband was really advancing and he was in a care facility, and he was having the hallucinations and we're getting out of options. And the neurologist said, well, we have one more option. It's 50, and he gave me the medication and I went through the insurance company, and even with insurance, it was $5,800 a month. And I just said no. And I said no to going to unnecessary doctor appointments, no to the cardiologist, no to the urologist, no to the ophthalmologist, to just keep things as simple as possible. Because even taking my husband to a dentist and going to the dentist created major anxiety and would then throw him off for days. This was a really hard one to push back on doctors and saying, no, we're done. The other thing in my daily meditation, in my prayers, I often said, may my husband's hallucinations be kind and gentle. And I also prayed for myself that may I learn from my sorrow and be transformed by it. I tried to look at what I was going through and kept reminding myself that I would learn something from this. I will be transformed by this experience. When I was in it, I had no idea what that meant. But adding this to my evening loving kindness meditation was helpful to me. And I would just suggest that add what helps you. And lastly, during the process and then right after my husband died, what helped me was understanding that there's a time where we're just living in liminality. And in fact, I wrote this, the very last chapter of the book is called Living in the Land of Liminality. And liminality is that place like our old lives are gone and we don't know what the new life will be. We're just sort of in this in-between space. And I think it's just accepting that it doesn't last. I'm here for those of you who are in it. You know, I pray and I think you'll get to beyond it. But I think it's just accepting liminality, that in between place, and not saying, not comparing our lives to our friends who are still living wonderful, normal lives and planning trips and going out to dinner. Remember when you could do that with your spouse and having this wonderful retirement, just letting that go. And nor do we know what the future is going to be yet. It's unpredictable. So just trying to accept that was also helpful to me. And lastly, you know, it's about despair. I love this quote from poet David White. You know, despair is a difficult, beautiful, necessary, a binding understanding between human beings caught in a fierce and difficult world, where half of our experience is mediated by loss, but it is a season, a waveform passing through the body, not a prison surrounding us. A season left to itself will always move, however slowly, under its own patience, power, and volition. And I think as caregivers, it's a season. We don't know how long it will move, and it's full of despair. And part of it is summoning that patience.
Mhm. Thank you so much,
You're
Lois. I'm
welcome.
going to go through some of the questions because there's quite a
Okay.
lot of questions or comments here. But I'm going to ask for the audience, folks, if I'm going to just ask you, and you can unmute yourself and just say yes or no, and then I will try to find you if your camera's on, so I can put you in a spotlight with Lois to ask your question. Kay Landon, you mentioned earlier that your husband died. You were in your early and mid-50s, 8 months ago, when he died of an aggressive brain tumor. I'm wondering if do you want to say anything about that? Just what you shared here, I think could be useful for people. Otherwise, I could read it. If you want me
Sure,
to. Yes,
sure.
thank you.
I,
Yes.
I'm happy to share a little bit. It resonated with me when Lois was speaking about she had a journey with her own mother who had a brain cancer diagnosis as well. But my journey was similar to, in some ways, what she's describing. My husband just was not himself. And it was really literally for 11 months, slowly losing my best friend, my confidant, my everything. We were married 33 years, almost 36 years together. So that was a lot, it's a lifetime. And again, a blessing. But I think speaking about when I hear her talk about some of the degenerative qualities of the brain stuff, that resonates. There's the physical part, but there's also just this whole mental part, and just losing your touchstone. Even though we were in the curative stage for a while, we were in the fighting stage for a while, and then we moved into palliative care with curative care, and then moved into hospice care for almost 8 months, for his last 8 months of life. So, it was a long, even though it was only 11 months, it was a long journey with lots of steps. And I appreciate that she says we all have our individual journeys, and we just need to kind of have grace with each other as we go through it.
Thank you so much. Yes. Lois, do you want to respond at all to that?
One of the things I want to say is that there's something, losing a spouse who you've been with for years. It's so different. I mean, it's horrible to lose a parent but it's a different experience losing a spouse. And sometimes when people say, "Well, my mother," and I try to be compassionate, but this losing a spouse, the person you've built a life with, the person, your go-to person, the person that you could talk about anything, and now they're alive, but it's tragic. So thank you, Kay, for sharing that.
This is reminding me, I had a conversation with a friend of mine. I met this woman initially because her daughter was in a group that we were facilitating for young adults that had life-threatening illness, and the parents group met once a month. And Nanette, very luckily, was able to get into remission and recover, but then years later died of this illness. And her mom had, at that point, she had been a hospice volunteer, in a program that I was the volunteer coordinator in. And I remember running into her and like after Nanette's death, and we had a conversation. She said, so many people tell me that they cannot imagine the loss of a child, like that just the most difficult thing that they could ever imagine. And she said, I don't want anybody to ever take this wrong. I love my daughter more than anything, but I think the worst loss possible could be a spouse that's, you're sharing a bed, you're sharing intimacy, you're sharing a life together for decades and decades. And she said, I don't know how I could move. She didn't have that experience herself. She was long divorced, but how she could move through that experience herself. And she thought that that would be the most difficult loss. So not that losses are a competition, but just that people bring different experiences to bear, and what might seem unbearable to one person, for another person, that is like what their experience is, and they can't imagine somebody else's.
Yeah.
Suzanne, I'm wondering if you would like to unmute yourself. I see that you had just a question here, and if not, just unmute yourself and say no, and I can just ask it. Suzanne, oh, there you go. I see you.
Thank you two so much for putting this on. This is a wonderful topic about slow loss, and it's not addressed. I've been working with hospice for 23 years. They don't address this kind of loss. People don't even understand it. And I'm just wondering, how do you address all the do-gooders who have advice on how to be a caregiver who's never even cared for a child, or those who equate, and I've had people do this. I've taken care of my kids. I know what it's like to be a caregiver. Excuse me, I don't think so. So how do you address that in a graceful way? Because I don't want to just gun people down.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I wrote this book is so that people would really understand what it's like. And people are like, I have people who are giving it to their children, who are giving it to their doctors to say, because if I had a little bit of a heads up, I would have been so much better prepared. But everything I read was the chirpy stuff, or the doctors, you can do it. And I mean, I felt blindsided. So I think it takes more of us to speak up. I will tell you, with this whole book process, traditional publishers are like, no, I don't think so. And even a lot of the associations, I said, could my book be listed on your website? And, one association, they said, we wish you well with your endeavor, but we can't support everyone who writes a book. And they have, and this is a leading association, they have nothing like what it's really like on their section for caregivers. It's such a disservice. So all we can do is speak up. Those of us who have a voice or a platform, I feel a responsibility, because caregivers are, there's suffering and sorrow, any sort of heads up, so that people know what you're going through too. I want people to know what it's like.
Well, I'm joining your team.
Excellent.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's so great to see you. This conversation is reminding me, I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Amour that came out. It was I think an Academy Award nominated foreign film. It may have won that year. But it was the story, it was a French made film, the story about a couple who are in their probably 70s or maybe early 80s, both super accomplished. She's an incredible pianist and he does something else. And now they're in their retirement. She develops dementia. And there's a scene that I will never forget. I think it is the daughter that comes back from the UK with her spouse. They have not been there to watch all the slow decline that the father and mother have managed together. But they come in the house and they start this litany of, well, have you done this or have you done, did you do this? And I mean, he's just like, no, I've just been like watching television, eating bonbons for the last 10 months or 2 years or however much time you had to absence yourself.
Almost 10 years.
Yes.
I've been a caregiver almost 10 years.
10 years. Like that is, I tell people like caregiving is the extreme sport that no one ever talks about. Like you can win an Olympic medal for doing like a run, but for people who are doing caregiving for more than a couple of months, it involves your body, your mind, it's physical, emotional, spiritual. It's all the things that a person who's dying is going through in terms of changes, but it requires everything. And the caregiver group I used to attend was happening simultaneously to a life-threatened people with life-threatened illness. And we would walk out every week and we would be sobbing and they would be laughing. And finally, one day, one of my friends said, oh, here they come, the boohoo group. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, the boohoo group? Like, we're keeping it all go. Like, and they're like, yeah, you guys every week come out sobbing. All we're doing is trying to stay alive for another week. You guys are trying to like balance our lives and your lives, and that the house looks good and like the medicine, like everything's perfect. And they're like, we're just trying to stay alive. And it just, I realized like it did take a little pressure off. But just the boohoo group, that is something I'll never forget.
You know, just a little follow-up, Lois and Susan, how would it address, because I'm also a grief counselor, how would addressing grief look different with slow loss than any other loss? Because it's almost like there's post-traumatic stress in there and everything else. So I don't know if you have any words about how to address that.
Well, I did two things. I can only share my experience. I did two things. One is I decided I would give myself a 1-year bereavement binge where I could do anything I wanted. And my accountant was really nervous because I'm a very logical, I'm really, I don't spend money frivolously. I said, I'm going to do anything I want. And that is what I've done. But it also was saying no to responsibilities and just free myself. The other thing, though, I did is I did go to an Irish psychedelic therapy group that specializes in PTSD, and I did psychedelic therapy. I had so much buried emotions and grief and exhaustion from, my husband, he died 12 years into his diagnosis, but he was sick way before then. And there was a lot there. I was in this process. There were 8 other people in our workshop. I was the one who had the roughest experience because there was a lot to process. And it was magnificent. It really helped me.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that. Couldn't do it now because I'm a caregiver, but I'm thinking of that direction. Yeah.
Very helpful.
Thank you so much for everything you're doing here.
Well,
both
thank
of
you. Good luck, good luck, good luck.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. There is a question from Nina. And Nina, I'm wondering if you would like to also ask the question yourself, or if you would prefer to have me read it, and you could just unmute yourself. And Sally, I do see your hand up. I'm going to come over to you next. I'm just going to try to get through some of these questions.
Hi.
Nina, do you have, hi. Let me
Thank
see if I
you.
can find you here to bring you down here, but go ahead and ask your question. I'll look while you're asking.
Firstly, thank you so much for bringing this space. I think it's amazing, and I'm very impressed by everything you read and you wrote and how you went through your experience. And I think it's just beautiful how you handled it sorry, handled it by yourself, and how in a way you came to be playful about it even. And that's for me is the most beautiful strength, is to be playful about death in a way, and it's really hard to get to. So thank you for sharing your strength and your courage, which is really inspiring. And my question to you would be like, it was kind of answered, but basically my grandmother is going through Alzheimer, and it's been already 2-3 years, and she had like 2 very important strokes. And she's living in another country, so I don't see her often, but it's more for my grandpa that is having a hard time dealing with all of this, the slow loss, basically. And I'd say like he has a rather like I really want to say like Western view of death, and and uh, and uh, like he's going through it alone, and I want to give him advices of how he can detach himself, maybe slowly, like starting to detach himself, and just tips also to not take personally the violence and the harm that the Alzheimer might cause to him. And like obviously even though you don't take it personally, to be surrounded all the time by violence anyways, so it's taking you down. But yeah, it's kind of my question.
Does he have friends, Nina?
Yeah.
Because I sometimes just being able to, you know, to bring somebody in the house for just 2 hour, an hour a day, so your grandpa could like have coffee with his friends, like just the a regular something where he's with other people, good friends as a support who will listen to him. That alone can be hugely helpful. And then the only other thing is, I don't know if he'd be open to this, but when really hard things would happen, the mantra I had would be, this is not my husband, it's the disease. It's not my husband, it's the disease. And to try to separate it, just that remembrance. But I think it's very isolating. And I think for men, many men, they don't express emotions, they're not good at asking for help, or maybe they are, I don't know. But if he can,
Not good at
but if he can, have time with his good friends, I think would be cool.
Being surrounded.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nina. I'm curious if there's any, yeah, oh, Sally, let's go to Sally's had her hand up here for a moment or two. Sally, I'm going to bring you down here and join the spotlight here, and then let's do this. There you go. Thank you. And if you unmute, there you go.
I want to piggyback on what you just ended with, Lois, about, and you suggested this earlier, that when we're in this caregiving circumstance, we do get isolated very easily because the normal social structures and so forth are not available, as at least not as much. And I wanted to also underscore something that we've said a number of times, is that caregiving is a marathon that we didn't train for. A number of us in the chat said, yeah, I can relate to that. And also, when you're in a marathon, there are all these other runners, and there are all these people on the sideline who are cheering you. And there's this endpoint, and you know where the endpoint is. None of that applies in this circumstance. So I love that use of that metaphor, and it's very helpful to me. So thank you for that. And to also what others have said, thank you for illuminating this phenomenon, because I similarly have run into this work with caregivers, is that, they're really Pollyanna. And, hello, pardon me, I love your use of the word chirpy, enough already for the chirpy cheerfulness. That's not what's happening. What I wanted to share is what I found in that gaslighting phenomenon, where the person with the diagnosis says, I'm fine, you know, you're the one who's catastrophizing, you're the one, so on and so forth, is a really helpful social worker coached me to say, this is not about what your experience is of this. What I need to talk to you about is what my experience of this is. And so we get off of the finger pointing or diagnosing or anything else, so they can't get into that defensive posture, and rather to say, what's going on, what I observe, and this is how it's affecting me, and this is how I'm having difficulty around this, and how can we problem solve together? And that took that oppositional headbutting and brought us into the same, looking out at the same phenomenon, which is very describable behaviors. And it also says to my partner, you're very capable. I trust you. We've solved a lot of things before together. How can we, and then it's, how can we solve about the door not getting locked, or how can we solve about whatever is the issue? I don't know if that would be helpful to others as well, but I too found that to be one of the most difficult things, because you're losing that person as your companion and your ally in looking into a difficult time. And then you're kind of stuck on your own, and you do start to feel crazy.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I was so grateful for caregiver support groups, which took me a long time to get to, just because of that feeling of crazy. Then I was with a group of people that were all crazy together, and each of us was crazier on a different day than the other. We could support each other, but it's extraordinarily isolating. And I think the reality is that, myself included, is that most people have no idea what this is like until they go through it themselves. And so even with the best intentions, people say or do things that can be extremely sort of not disrespectful. It's like, just they don't understand, and when they're trying to give support, they could say something that makes the situation just worse than it already feels, because then you just feel like really nobody really does get this, not even my close friends. So yeah,
I think if we can get out there and tell people what they can do when they hear of a friend, a neighbor, you know, what can you do? I mean, I have to say, some nights, just like trying to figure out what to cook for dinner, I was like, oh my gosh. Like if someone had just sent me a dinner once a week, that would have been helpful. Or if some people had, you know, text messages, just don't do it. Just call me on the phone and say, how are you? No, really, how are you? And let me talk. And just listen would be helpful. And so I think we need to train everybody, because with baby boomers, I mean, this is kind of an epidemic, and there are no either caregivers, there aren't, as we talked earlier, many, or it's wildly expensive. So we have to make people not afraid of reaching out to neighbors and friends, I think, and giving them practical things they can do to help us.
I even asked for practical advice very specifically, like that's something you can say to your friends or your community who say, how can I help? I said directly back, do you see anything that I could be doing that I'm not doing? And one of them so lovingly and practically said, Sally, you think you have to grow every vegetable you eat and cook every meal that you eat. And so have you heard of takeout? And that was like such a radical idea, but I found some good takeout places, and it's not that much more expensive, and it's such a help. And I feel like I'm being nourished.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe the question for us to always ask is, how can I be kinder to myself? What one thing, what one act of kindness could I do for myself? You know,
Mm.
so what if you go to bed and the kitchen isn't clean and you're exhausted? So what?
Yeah.
You know, but small things.
Thank you. There's also, a website, and I think this may work better for people of another generation than people of some generations, but there's a website called Lots of Helping Hands, where you can go in and put in things like, I need a ride, I need groceries on this day, I need laundry done on this day, and send it to people like in your sort of friend group, and they can sign up for things, and that's kind of a way maybe to get some needs met.
That's
But I
great.
think it's very hard when you're on the spot and you're in the middle of something and somebody's like, well, like, what do you need? And you're like, I need everything. Like, I have no idea. So just breaking down like sort of practical tasks that I need somebody to come and sit with me and watch such show on television where I can talk to you when my person I'm caring for isn't taking a nap. Just, those kinds of things, because also just regular conversation, like just sort of being engaged in life, caregiving becomes a very tunneled sort of experience. And
Mhm.
I think just having some of those things available could be useful. But I told my friends, like, look, I know that I'm here all the time doing this, and this is a choice I'm making. What would be most useful for me is that when Bob dies, that's when you come back and want, like, right now, this is where I want to be. But there's going to be a whole time after that where I'm going to need people to come and like say, you need to come for a walk, or you need to have dinner. You were going to the movies on this day, and just to start having a game plan for once the death happens, because after that, that's a whole different kind of experience. And so, yeah.
Do you see Mary Rose has her hand up?
I do. So we're going to go to Mary Rose, and then we're going to go to Elizabeth's question, which is in the chat. Mary Rose, hello. It's so good to see you here too. One second, I'm going to add you to the spotlight. Um, can I share that we know you also? From
Yes, yes,
Mute.
of
Yes,
course.
Mary Rose is another one of Anne Randolph's students and heard her.
Unmuted. One of the
Yes.
unmuted. And actually, that's kind of the vein of the question that I have. Lois, what do you make out of the fact that the disease organizations, not sure how else to refer to them, wanted nothing to do with your book, and
Mhm.
even the big publishers? And as importantly, what do you think we can do about that kind of thing?
Well, I think that the disease associations are really in the business of raising money for research. And to raise money, people want hope. They want hope. And so when we tell the truth, that that doesn't help raise money. So I understand that. And I think when you understand that's the business that the disease associations are in. So we need, Susan mentioned the Caregiver Alliance. We need other groups out there. So it's like, where do we look? The media, AARP was doing a story on like, when your partner's sick, how do you have a social life? And I'm like, oh, I'd love, I wrote to them and I told them my story, and they said, oh no, we want something more upbeat. We don't want to talk to somebody whose husband had Parkinson's and was trying to have a social life. So again, the media, they're trying to sell, either, political catastrophe or upbeat stories. I think it's, we don't need to go through traditional channels to get the word out. And we need to support one another, and everybody who's out there with a voice, trying to tell these stories that are helpful to people who are experiencing something similar. There are a number of people that it's been wonderful to meet who have written books, and my background's in marketing. So it's been easier for me to get the book out there because that's my background, but I'm trying to help these other people get their stuff out. So I guess it's just kind of peer-to-peer help is the only thing so far I can come up with. And maybe you and others have some good ideas on that.
It concerns me, it concerns me a lot because in the writing that I'm doing right now, I'm on the opposite side. I'm not the caregiver, I'm the patient. And not, fortunately, not with a mental deterioration type of a disease, but with an incurable cancer. And I could not put your book down
No,
when
thank
I
you.
read because of the honesty, because of the 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 authenticity of the experience. Because I've also seen those ridiculous pictures of the, happy, joyful people going through I won't even use the word journey when I talk about it's like, no, journey is when I go to Europe and spend 3 weeks seeing, wonderful things. This is not a journey. This is an experience. I'll give it that much. But getting off track. What I'm concerned about and what I am about is the authenticity and really saying it like it is. And in my case, on the flip side, I'm talking about what it's like to need um, to advocate for yourself, which goes to some of the questions about how do you deal with the doctors and that kind of thing. And I would have given anything to have found the book that I'm writing to have helped me get through the early parts of what I went through. And I just, yeah, how do we get that information out there? So I may have to circle back with you, Lois, about marketing.
I would help you in any way that I can. Absolutely. Absolutely. It would be my honor.
Thank you.
Yes, we do. I mean, the truth is that it's liberating, it's comforting, it's inspiring, and not to be feared.
Thank you both so much. Elisabeth had a question here. Elisabeth, do you want to unmute yourself to ask this question, or would you rather that I just go ahead and take it? I see that you've unmuted, so I'm going to try to locate you here while you go
I
ahead.
am unmuted.
Okay.
I've never done this before, so I don't know how to make myself visible. But my question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My question is, I go with my husband to his doctor's appointments now because he doesn't remember his medical details. And he has starting to accumulate a lot of them. And he's confused often. He has gaps in his memory and he's very impulsive and he's starting to act like a teenager. And the doctor says he's fine, gave him the cognitive test. Oh, he passed, and really won't address it. And so I don't really know what to do. I feel that I don't want to embarrass my husband, and he's in huge denial that anything's wrong with him. So I don't know the next step. I was wondering if you had any advice.
Sometimes we're with the wrong doctor. We bounced around to a few before I could find the right person. I also found that my husband, we got to his primary care was a female primary care physician who, when we would go to her, she was wonderful and she helped him stop the denials. She would say, are you listening to Lois? Are you being kind to her? So sometimes, Elisabeth, we have the wrong doctor and it's okay to find a new doctor. And sometimes we need multiple doctors, the specialist or neurologist and a primary care doctor. Or sometimes if you can find like a therapist, if your husband would feel comfortable with that. But I think you might need a team. And you don't have to stay with someone who's treating you that way when you obviously know there's something seriously wrong and it's very complex.
Okay, thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And
Mhm,
yes, I
thank
hope that
you.
you find the right support for you and your husband.
Thank
Um,
you.
Thank you so much. There's a question, is your book available in Spanish yet?
It's not yet.
Yes, thank you.
And there's an audio book too. I know a lot of people like to listen.
Mhm.
And so I apologize in advance for the Boston accent, but it is.
Wow.
Anyway.
Well, I'm looking at the time and I am seeing that it is it's 11:30 here for us. Lois, thank you so much for this conversation today. I will be sending out a follow-up when the link is available online. I will be sending this out to all of you via Eventbrite, so you can take a listen or share this with people. In there, there'll be resources, including information about the folks like Nick Cave that Lois mentioned earlier, and a link to her book page, which I'm going to just put up here for those of you that are interested right now before this comes out. I'm hoping that Ken Ross is, I think he's home, yep, so that he'll be able to post this fairly immediately. But for all of you, I'm about to turn this off in terms of the recording and say goodbye to all of you, to thank you all, and then I'll be able to stay in the room for about 5 minutes after this is over. I'm not sure that Lois can, but
I
just
will.
looking
And I was going to say, if there's any unanswered questions, I'm putting my email here.
thank you, Lois.
And, you know, and just reach out and we can also, I can then share my phone number.
Yep, thank you, because I really feel like this is really the caregivers supporting each other, peers supporting each other who know what this experience is like, have lived inside of it deeply, is just such an incredible support. So on behalf of everybody at the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, Lois, I want to thank you so much. To those of you that just spent the last hour and a half of your life with us, thank you all so very much. And I know that we have, I think, 3 or 4 more Death Cafes scheduled between now and the end of the year. We don't have another event, given that we're so close to the end of the year, but look forward to seeing you all in 2025. And we're going to stop the recording now. And, oh, iPhone from New Zealand. Thank you so much for coming. That's my last year's favorite place to go. So we're going to stop recording right now and wish you all the best, and thank you so much for being